He rode all night holding two babies. When she found him, he could hardly breathe. The sky over Aradara Prime was a strange, burning shade of orange, a mix of dust and the fading light from the twin suns. Ryan gripped the handlebars of his old hoverbike, his arms shaking with exhaustion, but his eyes were wide with determination. Two tiny bodies rested against his chest, wrapped in thin blankets salvaged from a broken transport pod. Their soft, rhythmic breathing was the only sound besides the whine of the hoverbike's engines and the distant hum of alien drones searching the desert plains. Ryan had been awake for more than a day. He remembered the moment clearly. The transport ship had been hit, and chaos had erupted in the colony. People ran in every direction, panic in their eyes. Ryan hadn't seen the attackers at first, just heard the warning sirens and felt the rumble beneath the ground. And then he had found them, the two babies no more than a few months old lying in the wreckage, crying but unharmed. He had picked them up without hesitation. The world could wait, the babies could not. Now he was racing through the night, guided by faint starlight and the soft glow of his bike's navigation panel. Every bump in the desert shook him, threatened to throw him off balance, but he held on. His arms ached, his back screamed, and his lungs burned from the cold, thin air. Yet he pressed forward, driven by a simple human instinct: protect the helpless. Ryan had learned to survive alone. He had learned to outsmart predators, repair machines with whatever was at hand, and navigate the harshest terrain. But nothing in his life had prepared him for this. Nothing had prepared him for holding two fragile lives in his arms while fleeing through a desert that seemed determined to swallow him whole. The first hour had been the hardest. His hoverbike's energy cells were low, forcing him to slow down and make careful calculations. Every shadow in the distance could be an alien drone. Every sudden gust of wind could topple him. But Ryan refused to look back. Looking back meant fear. Fear was dangerous. Forward was survival. Forward was life. As he rode, he spoke softly to the babies. "Don't worry, we'll be okay. Just stay close. I've got you." His voice was rough from shouting and exhaustion, but the babies responded with small coos and shifts, as if understanding that he was there, that he was trying. That simple recognition, that small sign of life, gave him courage. Hours passed. The desert was a living maze of shifting sands, sharp rocks, and sudden cliffs. Ryan navigated through it by memory and instinct, following the faint outline of an old smuggler's route he had once memorized. Every decision could mean the difference between life and death. Every second mattered. His chest burned now, not just from effort but from panic, fatigue, and the tight grip of his harness around him. Breathing was difficult, his vision blurred from exhaustion. Yet still, he moved forward, step by step, mile by mile. His mind wandered to thoughts of the colony, of the people he had left behind, of the parents who might never see their children again. It was a heavy weight, almost as heavy as the two babies he carried. But then he remembered something. Humans survived. Humans had survived deserts, oceans, wars, and plagues. They had endured because they cared, because they did not give up. And in that thought, Ryan found strength. His body screamed, but his spirit roared. He would survive. They would survive. The first sign of danger came as a low, mechanical hum in the distance. Ryan froze for a fraction of a second, then leaned forward, increasing speed. The drones were coming. He knew they were tracking him. He had seen them before, small flying machines, cold and silent, designed to find life and report it back to the invaders. They were precise, relentless, and they did not stop. Ryan's mind worked fast. He remembered an old trick he had learned. Reflective surfaces could confuse the sensors for a few seconds. He veered toward a rocky outcrop where shards of broken metal glinted in the dim light. The drones hesitated, their scanning beams bouncing off the metal shards, and Ryan used the chance to slip past. He held the babies closer, murmuring, "Almost there, just a little farther." The desert seemed endless, but every now and then Ryan would spot a faint glimmer of hope. A ruined building, an abandoned outpost, a place where he could rest for a moment. He used these spots to check on the babies, to feed them water from a small collapsible bottle, and to whisper words of comfort. "You're safe now, I promise." The night wore on, and exhaustion became a constant companion. His body was on the edge of collapse, but his mind refused to stop. Every muscle burned, every joint ached, but he could not slow down. The babies depended on him, and humans survived by protecting each other, no matter the cost. At one point, he almost fell into a deep crevice hidden beneath the sand. The bike jolted violently, throwing him forward. He caught himself just in time, heart pounding, sweat streaming down his face. The babies whimpered and he pressed them closer, whispering apologies and promises. "We're okay, we're okay." The first rays of the twin suns began to rise, painting the desert in hues of gold and red. Ryan's vision cleared and he spotted something in the distance, the faint outline of a settlement, a cluster of structures that promised safety, food, and human contact. His heart leaped. There was hope. There was life. But the drones were still behind him, growing closer with every second. He had to reach the settlement before they caught up. Ryan adjusted his course, leaning low on the bike to gain speed. The wind whipped against his face, carrying sand into his eyes, but he did not flinch. He could feel the babies' small bodies trembling, and he whispered encouragements he barely believed himself. "Just a little farther, we're almost there." Every obstacle became a test of human ingenuity. A broken bridge, he jumped it. A narrow canyon, he hugged the edges. Loose sand, he adjusted the bike's hover field. The desert seemed determined to stop him, but Ryan was determined to survive. He was human, and humans did not give up. By mid-morning, his arms were shaking uncontrollably, and his chest burned with every breath. Sweat soaked his clothes, and his body screamed for rest. Yet he kept moving, kept breathing, kept holding the babies as if they were the only things keeping him alive. Because they were. Finally, after what felt like endless hours, the settlement came closer. The structures were damaged but standing, and he could see people moving, shouting, waving. Safety was near. Ryan's mind gave one last push of hope, one last surge of energy. He leaned forward, gripping the handlebars, holding the babies, and drove into the settlement like a man possessed. As he crossed the threshold, people rushed toward him, pulling him off the hoverbike. Relief, awe, and gratitude filled the air. The babies cooed softly, and Ryan slumped to the ground, utterly exhausted. He could hardly breathe. Every muscle in his body was spent, yet he had done it. He had survived. And for the first time that night, he allowed himself a small smile. Humans survived. Humans endured. And sometimes, humans carried hope, 2 tiny lives at a time, through the darkest night. Ryan lay on the soft sand just outside the small settlement, breathing heavily. His body ached in ways he hadn't known possible. Every muscle screamed, and even the small act of holding the babies against his chest felt like lifting the weight of the world. The infant stirred slightly, sensing the rhythm of his heartbeat, and he whispered softly, "Almost safe, almost." But safety, he knew, was a fragile illusion. The drones were still out there. They were small, fast, and relentless. They would not stop, and Ryan had no intention of letting them catch these children. Humans were stubborn. Humans fought for what they loved. Humans survived. And Ryan, despite exhaustion, was every bit human. He tried to rest, to gather the fragments of energy left in his body. But the settlement was quiet only for a moment. Then he heard the low, mechanical hum in the distance, the unmistakable sound of the alien drones searching for life. His chest tightened. There was no time to rest. Ryan pushed himself up and scanned the horizon. He could see the faint glint of metallic wings reflecting the sun, moving with precision over the desert. His mind raced. He had no weapons, only his hoverbike and his wits. But humans had survived far worse with far less. He lifted the babies carefully, adjusting the blankets so they would not slip. "We're moving again," he whispered. Their small hands clutched his clothing instinctively. Ryan's heart clenched. He felt their trust as a weight heavier than any he had ever carried. And he would not fail them. Using the settlement structures for cover, Ryan moved the hoverbike into a narrow canyon nearby. The drones followed from above, scanning, searching, their sensors flickering like ghostly eyes. Ryan's mind worked quickly. He remembered an old trick from his childhood on Earth. Humans had always used the terrain to survive, to hide, to outsmart. He guided the hoverbike into tight spaces between rocks where the drones could not follow easily. One drone hovered above the canyon entrance, its sensors glowing. Ryan held his breath, motionless, letting it pass. The babies wriggled slightly and he whispered, "SHH, don't move too much." Once past the first wave, he pushed the hoverbike faster, skimming over sand dunes, weaving through jagged rock formations. The terrain was brutal, the sun beating down, but he did not slow. Every moment counted. The drones would adapt. They were efficient. But humans could think. Humans could improvise. He remembered a trick from the colony's old defense manuals. Dust clouds could interfere with the drone's sensors. He sped toward a dry riverbed, lifting a small cloud of sand with the hoverbike's engines. The drones faltered, confused by the shifting dust. Ryan seized the moment, racing through the riverbed, weaving unpredictably. Despite his exhaustion, Ryan allowed himself a brief glance at the infants. Their tiny faces were calm now, almost asleep, trusting him completely. That trust, he thought, was the most powerful weapon a human could wield. It was hope, it was life, it was stubbornness. The drones may be faster, stronger, and more advanced, but they did not understand humans. They did not understand the fire that burned in the heart of a person who refused to give up. The hours stretched on. Every turn of the hoverbike, every careful maneuver, demanded precision and strength he barely had. His lungs burned with every breath, but he forced himself to inhale, forcing energy back into his limbs. He thought of the stories his grandmother used to tell him about survival, about humans stranded on deserts, in oceans, and in space. Humans always found a way. The canyon narrowed sharply. Ryan had to squeeze the hoverbike through a gap that seemed too small to pass. The baby squeaked, alarmed by the sudden movement. He whispered encouragement, his words soft but firm. "We can do this, I'm here." The engines hummed with effort, straining, and the hoverbike pressed forward. A shard of rock brushed against the side, but they made it. From above, the drones circled, scanning. They were learning, adapting to his tactics. Ryan needed more than speed. He needed distraction. He remembered a collapsed mine shaft nearby. With careful steering, he directed the hoverbike to kick up loose stones and dust from the mine entrance. The drones hesitated, scanning for heat signatures, and he slipped past. Every second, every decision was a gamble, but humans survived by taking risks, by thinking faster than any opponent. As the sun began to set behind the twin peaks of the horizon, Ryan allowed himself a brief pause. The babies were warm against him, safe for a moment, and he could feel their tiny breaths. He leaned against a rock, letting the hoverbike rest. He closed his eyes for just a second, just a fraction, and felt the weight of the night pressing on him. But there was no time for rest. The drones would return, and humans never gave up. He stood again, adjusting the blankets around the infants. "We're almost at the cliffs," he murmured. "Then we'll be out of the open desert." The cliffs were dangerous, sharp drops, jagged rocks, and unstable ground. But they also offered a secret. A series of narrow tunnels carved by ancient settlers, places where the drones could not follow. Ryan aimed for the first opening, the hoverbike skimming over the rocky paths with careful precision. The babies wriggled in response to the sudden motions, and he murmured softly to them, telling stories about Earth, about forests, about rivers, anything to keep them calm. Hours turned into a long, grueling night. The desert was alive with movement, with the hum of distant machines, the crackle of shifting sand, and the constant reminder that failure was not an option. Ryan's body was close to giving out, but his mind refused to stop. Every time fatigue threatened to overwhelm him, he remembered the soft trust of the babies. Their lives depended on him, and humans did not abandon those in need. When he finally reached the first tunnel, relief washed over him, but only briefly. The tunnels were dark, unstable, and unfamiliar. One wrong turn could leave them trapped. But Ryan lit a small portable lamp, the faint glow illuminating the narrow walls, and guided the hoverbike forward carefully. The babies were quiet now, soothed by the rhythmic hum of the engine and the steady vibrations beneath them. Inside the tunnels, Ryan allowed himself to think for the first time since the chase began. He remembered the colony's lessons. Humans are strongest when they work together. He was alone, yes, but he had the babies and he had his own mind. That was enough. Humans could survive because they adapted, because they learned, because they refused to give up. The drones were slowed by the narrow passages. Their sensors could not navigate the twists and turns easily, and Ryan took advantage, moving quietly, cautiously, but persistently forward. Hours passed in this rhythm, careful progress, constant vigilance, and whispered encouragements to the infants. Every small step was victory, every careful turn a triumph of human determination. By the time the first light of dawn crept into the tunnel, Ryan reached the edge of the cliffs. Beyond lay a canyon filled with scrub vegetation, small pools of water and signs of other human survivors. He could feel hope building. The drones had not followed, at least not yet. And he allowed himself a single thought: maybe, just maybe, they were safe. He rested briefly, letting the babies settle against him. He whispered softly, "We made it this far, we can make it farther." His chest ached, his arms shook, but there was pride in the exhaustion. Humans endured. Humans survived. Humans fought, not because they had to, but because they cared, because they could, because they refused to stop. The canyon below offered a path forward, and Ryan knew that every step would bring new challenges. But he also knew something more important. Humans, fragile though they may be, were unstoppable when driven by purpose and care. And for these two small lives in his arms, he would continue, no matter the cost. The sun rose higher, painting the desert in warm golds and reds. Ryan lifted the hoverbike, adjusted the blankets around the infants, and pushed onward. The night of flight was over, but the journey was far from complete. And yet, as humans always did, he moved forward with hope, with courage, and with an unbreakable spirit. The canyon was quiet now. The hoverbike hummed softly beneath Ryan, the vibration a small comfort against the stillness. The sun was climbing higher, and its warmth felt heavy on his shoulders. He had been moving for hours, ever since the night when the desert had seemed endless. Every muscle in his body ached, every breath was a battle, yet he had no choice. The babies depended on him. Ryan adjusted the blankets around the two infants, who were now drowsy, their tiny hands curling against his chest. He whispered softly, his voice trembling with exhaustion, "Almost there, just a little farther." His words felt hollow to his ears, but the babies seemed to respond. They were calm, trusting him completely. That trust was his anchor, the spark that refused to let him give up. But his body was reaching a breaking point. His legs shook beneath him, his arms ached as though filled with lead, and his lungs burned with every breath. Even breathing felt like a chore, yet he forced himself forward. Humans had survived far worse. Humans had crossed deserts, oceans, and entire planets. Humans endured, and Ryan was human. The hoverbike shuddered as they descended a narrow path, a sharp drop to one side and jagged rocks on the other. A loose stone caught under the hover skids, sending a small jolt through the machine. Ryan's grip tightened instinctively. The baby stirred, and he murmured reassurance, his voice steady even though his heart raced. "It's okay, we're fine." He had no food, very little water, and his body was drained of energy. Every step, every movement required conscious effort. He remembered his training in survival, the lessons from the colony. Conserve energy, plan your route, think ahead. And he was thinking, always thinking, even as his eyelids grew heavy. Hours passed in this rhythm, careful navigation, whispered encouragement and silent determination. The canyon twisted and turned, and with each turn, Ryan's strength dwindled. His vision blurred. His hands shook as he adjusted the blankets around the babies, making sure they were warm and secure. And yet, despite the fatigue, he refused to stop. Humans endured. Humans protected. Humans survived. Then it happened. The hoverbike jolted violently over a hidden rock. Ryan's arm slipped slightly and the babies cried out. Panic surged through him. He managed to stabilize the bike, pressing the infants close to his chest. He whispered urgently, "SHH, it's okay, I've got you." His voice broke, but he refused to let fear take him over. He pulled the hoverbike to a stop, leaning against a rock wall. Sweat poured down his face, his chest heaving. His body trembled uncontrollably. He could feel his strength leaving him, leaving behind only the will to survive. The babies, sensing his tension, pressed closer. Their small warmth was comforting, a reminder that he could not give up, not for them, not for anyone. Ryan slumped against the rock, closing his eyes for a brief moment. His mind was a whirlwind of exhaustion, pain, and determination. He thought of Earth, of the people who had survived impossible odds, of stories of human courage. Humans could endure. Humans could survive. Humans could rise again when all seemed lost. He opened his eyes and looked at the babies. Their tiny faces were calm again, trusting him completely. That trust was not just hope, it was power. It was the kind of power that made humans unpredictable, unstoppable, and strong. Ryan took a deep breath, ignoring the pain in his lungs, and rose to his feet. The path ahead was narrow and treacherous. Loose stones, sharp rocks, and sudden drops threatened every step, but Ryan moved carefully, every motion deliberate. He used his experience to guide them safely, leaning into the hoverbike, adjusting weight, and holding the babies close. Every small success was a victory. Every careful movement kept them alive. As the sun rose higher, the heat became unbearable. Ryan's energy reserves were nearly gone. He had no more water to sip, no food to give him strength. The babies were quiet, perhaps sensing his struggle. He whispered to them constantly, telling stories of rivers and forests, of mountains and oceans. His voice was soft but firm, a steady rhythm to keep them calm. Suddenly, the hoverbike skidded on a patch of loose gravel. Ryan stumbled but caught himself, pressing the babies tightly against him. His chest burned as he fought for air. Every step forward felt like climbing a mountain, but he kept moving. Humans survived because they adapted, because they refused to give up, because they protected what mattered most. Hours felt like days. Ryan's mind swirled with fatigue, yet he pushed forward. He used every trick he knew, shifting weight, adjusting speed, hugging the edges of cliffs to avoid loose rocks, and using the hoverbike's engines to stabilize against the wind. The babies stirred occasionally, their soft coos a gentle encouragement that he could not ignore. At one point, exhaustion hit him like a physical wall. His knees buckled, his vision blurred. He could barely lift the hoverbike over a large rock formation. The baby squeaked, sensing danger. Panic surged again, but Ryan forced himself to focus. One hand on the handlebars, the other holding the infants, he inched forward with slow, deliberate movements. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he reached a small plateau. The canyon walls opened to reveal a distant settlement, faint but visible in the morning light. Hope surged through him, giving him the strength to push the last few meters. He adjusted the blankets, whispered encouragements, and leaned into the hoverbike for one final effort. The babies were quiet now, their tiny faces peaceful. Ryan felt a pang of emotion, pride, relief, and love intertwined. Humans survived because of moments like this, because of the small choices made in the face of impossible odds. He took a deep, shuddering breath and pressed forward, ignoring the screaming muscles and burning lungs. At the edge of the plateau, the hoverbike finally slowed. Ryan could barely stand, but he lifted the babies carefully, cradling them in his arms. He whispered softly, "We made it, we're almost safe." His body trembled uncontrollably, but he refused to collapse entirely. Humans endured because they had to. Humans survived because they would not quit. The settlement below was alive with movement, other humans, awake and alert, going about their morning tasks. Ryan could see them clearly now, and a small smile touched his lips. He had done it. He had survived. The babies were safe. And humans never gave up. He made his way down slowly, every step careful. The hoverbike rested behind him, silent now, a small companion that had carried him through the night. His chest heaved and he could barely breathe, but the sight of the settlement filled him with hope. Humans could survive anywhere, even against overwhelming odds. Finally, he reached the outskirts of the settlement. Other humans rushed to meet him, their eyes wide with awe and concern. Ryan's legs gave way slightly, and they helped him down. The babies cooed softly, their tiny hands reaching out instinctively. He felt their trust once again, a powerful reminder that humans endured because they cared. As the settlement welcomed him, Ryan realized something important. The collapse of his body was temporary, but the spirit of humans was eternal. Humans could survive deserts, storms, and alien machines. Humans could endure exhaustion, fear, and uncertainty. Humans could rise again stronger because they had something no machine could ever have: hope, love, and determination. He closed his eyes briefly, leaning against the hands that offered support. The babies were still safe, still alive, and he had carried them through the impossible. Humans survived because they protected each other, because they refused to give up, and because they never stopped moving forward, even when everything seemed lost. The canyon behind him seemed less threatening now. The hoverbike, the desert, and the night of flight had tested him, pushed him to the limits, but they had also proven one thing: humans endured. Ryan breathed deeply, feeling the exhaustion wash over him, but also the quiet pride of survival. And for the first time in many hours, he allowed himself a small, exhausted smile. Humans survived. Humans endured. And sometimes, survival meant carrying hope, 2 tiny lives at a time, through the collapse of night and the dawn of day. Ryan's legs trembled as he stepped into the settlement, the hoverbike resting silently behind him. Every step was a battle, but he kept moving, holding the 2 babies carefully against his chest. Their tiny hands pressed against his clothing, and their soft, trusting coos gave him strength. He had survived the night, the canyon, and the chase, but the journey was not over. Humans survived by taking one step at a time, no matter how heavy the burden. The settlement was modest but alive. Small clusters of humans moved about, carrying out tasks, tending gardens, and repairing structures damaged in past storms. Their faces lit up when they saw Ryan, wide eyes filled with concern and awe. He had made it this far, but he could barely stand. His chest burned with every breath, and his muscles screamed in protest. From the crowd, a woman ran toward him, her movements fast and purposeful. She was tall, with short hair tied back, and her eyes shone with determination. She reached him in moments, kneeling to assess his condition. "Ryan," she called, her voice urgent but calm. "You made it. Are the babies okay?" "They're safe," Ryan whispered, his voice strained. I got them here." His chest heaved as he struggled to breathe. The woman gently took the infants from his arms, cradling them carefully. The babies cooed softly in response, and her face softened with relief. "You did it," she said, her voice steady. "You carried them all night. You're a hero." Ryan's lips twitched into a small, exhausted smile. Heroes, he thought, were not born. They were made in moments like this, when humans refused to give up. The woman, whose name was Lyra, helped Ryan sit on a nearby bench. Others from the settlement gathered, offering water, blankets, and words of encouragement. The babies were safe now, wrapped in soft cloth and held gently. Ryan allowed himself to relax, if only slightly. Humans survived because they supported one another, and now he could feel that support surrounding him. As he sipped water, his mind wandered back to the desert, the night, and the canyon. Every obstacle had tested him, every second had been a fight for survival. But humans endured because they adapted. They used their minds, their instincts, and their determination to overcome what seemed impossible. And he had done just that. Lyra knelt beside him, checking his breathing and listening to his heartbeat. "You pushed yourself too far," she said softly. "You could have been seriously hurt, but you didn't stop, you didn't give up." Ryan nodded, exhausted. "Humans survive," he whispered. "We keep going." The settlement was quiet for a moment, as if acknowledging his words. Humans survived not because they were the strongest, but because they cared, because they acted when others could not, and because they refused to give up, even in the darkest nights. Lyra helped him to his feet, guiding him toward a small building used for rest and recovery. Inside, the walls were lined with beds, supplies, and equipment salvaged from older settlements. Ryan was gently helped onto a bed, his muscles finally relaxing. The babies were placed beside him, safe and warm. He closed his eyes, feeling the weight of exhaustion settle over him like a heavy blanket. For hours he rested, drifting between sleep and wakefulness. Every so often he stirred, checking on the babies instinctively, making sure they were still safe. Humans survived because they cared, because their hearts refused to rest when others depended on them. And these two small lives depended on him. As the sun set, casting warm light into the room, Ryan awoke fully. Lyra was still nearby, watching over the infants. She smiled when she saw him awake. "You're strong," she said simply. "Stronger than anyone I've seen." Ryan smiled faintly. Strength, he thought, was not measured in muscles or machines. Strength was measured in endurance, in courage, in the refusal to give up. Outside, the settlement began to hum with life. Humans moved with purpose, repairing damaged buildings, cultivating small gardens, and preparing for the challenges ahead. They were fragile, yet unyielding. They were human. And Ryan understood something clearly. No matter the obstacles, humans survived because they were willing to fight, not for glory, but for life, for hope, and for one another. Lyra guided Ryan outside to a small balcony overlooking the settlement. The desert stretched beyond, harsh and unforgiving but alive with possibilities. Ryan looked out, breathing deeply, feeling the warmth of the sun and the coolness of the wind. He felt hope for the first time in days. Humans endured. Humans adapted. Humans thrived in the most impossible conditions. The babies were nearby, cooing softly as children often did, their innocence a reminder of what humans fought for. Ryan knelt beside them, feeling the trust and hope they carried. "We made it," he whispered. "We're safe now." Humans survived because they held onto hope, even when everything seemed lost. And Ryan had proven that, carrying them through the night, through exhaustion, and through the dangers of the desert. As evening fell, the settlement gathered for a simple meal. Humans shared food, water, and stories of survival. Ryan sat quietly, letting others care for him while he watched the babies interact with other children. Their laughter and coos filled the air, a sound that was stronger than any machine, more powerful than any challenge. Humans endured because they found joy even in hardship. Lyra approached him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You've done more than survive," she said. "You've inspired everyone here. We can fight, we can endure because of people like you." Ryan nodded, humbled. Humans survived not because they were perfect, but because they cared, because they acted, and because they never gave up. That night, as Ryan lay resting in the settlement for the first time since the chase, he thought about the journey. The desert, the hoverbike, the canyon, and the relentless drones had tested him beyond limits. But humans endured. Humans adapted. Humans survived. And sometimes survival meant holding onto hope and two tiny lives in the darkest night. The babies slept soundly beside him, safe and warm. Ryan closed his eyes, feeling the weight of exhaustion but also the strength of humanity. Humans endured because they cared, because they protected one another, and because they refused to give up. Outside, the wind whispered through the desert, carrying the promise of a new day. The settlement was alive with life, a small but powerful reminder that humans survived against all odds. Ryan's chest rose and fell, steady and strong, as he allowed himself to rest fully. Humans endured not because they had to, but because they could. And in that moment, Ryan realized something important. Humans were more than survival. Humans were hope. Humans were courage. Humans were the reason the world kept turning, even when the night was darkest. The desert beyond the settlement was still harsh, still dangerous. But for Ryan and the two babies, there was safety, there was warmth, and there was life. Humans endured because they believed, because they cared, and because they refused to stop moving forward. The night passed peacefully. The settlement's lights glowed softly, reflecting off the walls of nearby buildings. Humans moved quietly, tending to tasks, watching over the young and ensuring the safety of their community. Ryan slept, exhausted but unbroken, surrounded by the small but powerful symbol of human resilience, the two tiny lives he had protected through the longest night of his life. In the morning, Ryan awoke to laughter and the soft coos of the infants. He smiled, feeling hope rise within him. Humans survived because they cared, because they acted, and because they refused to quit. And now, with the babies safe, Ryan understood the truth of that lesson more clearly than ever. Humans endured. Humans adapted. Humans thrived. And sometimes, they did so with two tiny lives in their arms, through the longest nights, across the harshest deserts, and against every challenge the universe could throw at them. Ryan awoke to the soft glow of dawn streaming through the settlement's windows. The two infants were nestled safely beside him, their breathing steady, their small faces peaceful. For the first time in days, he felt fully rested, though his body still ached from the night-long flight through the desert. He looked out across the settlement and saw the humans moving with purpose, repairing structures, tending gardens, and preparing for the challenges that the harsh world of Aradara Prime would continue to bring. Humans endured. Humans adapted. Humans survived. That truth had carried him through exhaustion, fear, and uncertainty. And now, as he observed the small but determined community, he realized it was not just survival that made humans extraordinary. It was their spirit, their ingenuity, and their refusal to give up. Lyra approached him, her steps quiet but confident. She carried a small tray of water and food, placing it gently on the table beside him. "Rested enough?" she asked, her eyes warm with concern. Ryan nodded, taking the food and eating slowly, savoring each bite. Strength returned not just to his body but to his mind. "We've received reports of more drones nearby," Lyra continued. "But the people here are ready. Your journey inspired them, Ryan. You showed them what humans are capable of." Ryan smiled faintly, a quiet pride in his eyes. Humans survived because they inspired one another. One person's courage could ignite the determination of many. After breakfast, Ryan stood and went outside, the two infants held carefully in his arms. The settlement was alive with activity. Adults worked alongside teenagers and even children, preparing defenses, organizing resources, and mapping the surrounding desert. Every action, every decision, reflected the ingenuity and resilience that had carried humanity through centuries of challenge. Ryan joined the group in planning the next steps. Humans did not wait for danger to strike. They prepared. They analyzed the drone's patterns, tested the hoverbike's energy cells, and devised new ways to camouflage their positions. Every human mind was engaged, every skill valuable. And at the center of it all, Ryan found himself not just participating but inspiring. "Listen," Ryan began, holding the attention of the group. "We survived the night because we acted. We survived because we protected what mattered. We survived because we didn't give up. That same determination will carry us forward. We will face the drones, but we will be ready. We will survive because humans endure, humans think, and humans fight, not with weapons alone, but with courage and cleverness." A murmur of agreement spread through the crowd. Humans had survived impossible odds before, and the example of Ryan's journey reminded them why they could continue to do so. Even the youngest members of the settlement looked at him with wide eyes, learning that human strength was not just physical. It was the will to protect, to endure, and to act in the face of danger. Ryan spent the rest of the morning helping organize patrols, setting up early warning systems, and coordinating routes for evacuation if needed. He demonstrated simple but effective techniques, using mirrors to reflect sunlight and confuse drones, creating decoy heat signatures with portable devices, and teaching humans to move silently across difficult terrain. Every tactic was rooted in ingenuity, creativity, and human instinct. Meanwhile, the infants cooed softly, observing the activity around them. Their presence reminded the adults why all of this effort mattered. Humans survived because they protected the vulnerable, because they nurtured hope, and because they refused to allow fear to dominate their actions. The babies were not just lives to protect, they were symbols of the future, evidence that humans could endure, learn, and thrive across generations. As the sun reached its peak, the first scouts returned from the desert beyond the settlement. They reported that the drones were active but cautious, likely sensing the humans' new preparedness. Ryan listened carefully, analyzing the reports. "They're learning," he said. "We must stay one step ahead, but we can do it." Humans survive because they think, adapt, and persevere. We are unpredictable, and that is our advantage. The settlement leaders gathered for a final strategy meeting before the first organized counteraction. Ryan stood at the center, holding a small map of the surrounding terrain. He pointed to routes, safe zones, and natural barriers that could be used to their advantage. "We don't need to confront the drones directly," he explained. "We need to move smartly, use the terrain, and protect everyone. Humans survive when they work together, and that is what we will do." Throughout the day, the community executed the plan with precision. Children helped maintain supply lines, adults set up observation posts, and teams moved quietly through the desert, placing decoys and monitoring drone activity. Every human contributed according to their ability, demonstrating the collective strength and ingenuity that made their species extraordinary. By evening, the drones approached, but the settlement was ready. False trails, reflective decoys, and clever use of terrain kept the invaders at bay. No one panicked. Humans adapted. The drones, unable to predict the humans' moves, hesitated and withdrew. A collective cheer rose from the settlement. Humans survived not by brute strength alone, but by thought, coordination, and unyielding spirit. Ryan watched from the edge of the settlement, holding one of the babies while Lyra held the other. "We did it," he whispered, a quiet awe in his voice. "Humans survive." Lyra nodded, smiling. "Humans endured because they cared, because they acted, and because they refused to stop, no matter how impossible the odds." The night fell peacefully over the settlement. The air was filled with the soft hum of life, children laughing, adults speaking quietly, and the occasional mechanical whir of a hoverbike on patrol. Ryan sat near a small fire, the babies resting in blankets beside him. He reflected on the journey, the night-long flight, and the collapse he had experienced in the canyon. Every challenge had tested him, yet here he was, stronger and wiser, surrounded by humans thriving against the odds. In the days that followed, the settlement flourished. The community learned from Ryan's experience, applying his techniques and innovations to improve safety and efficiency. Humans survived because they learned from one another, because every experience, every struggle, made them stronger. And the story of Ryan carrying the two babies across the desert became a tale of courage, endurance, and human spirit, inspiring generations to come. The infants grew healthy and strong, a living testament to human resilience. They were surrounded by care, protection, and guidance, and their presence reminded everyone that the future of humanity depended not only on survival, but also on hope and compassion. Humans survived because they nurtured life, protected each other, and refused to give up. Ryan, now resting and recuperating fully, watched as the settlement thrived. He saw the strength of humans not in weapons, but in their hearts, in their minds, and in their determination to endure. They were fragile, yes, but unyielding. They were ordinary, yet extraordinary in the ways that mattered most. One evening, as the twin suns dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with orange and purple, Ryan stood at the edge of the settlement with Lyra and the babies. The desert stretched endlessly beyond, a reminder of the challenges yet to come. But Ryan smiled, holding the children close. Humans survived. Humans endured. Humans thrived, not because they were invincible, but because they refused to stop, refused to surrender, and refused to lose hope. The community gathered to celebrate, not just survival, but triumph, the triumph of ingenuity, courage, and compassion. Humans had faced impossible odds and had prevailed, and at the heart of it was the simplest truth. Humans endured because they cared, they adapted, and they acted when others might have given up. Ryan whispered softly to the babies, who smiled and cooed in response. "You'll grow up in a world worth fighting for," he said. "Humans survive, humans endure, and humans rise again, always." And in that moment, as the settlement glowed softly against the darkening desert, Ryan understood the power of human spirit. It was not just strength, speed, or technology that ensured survival. It was courage, hope, ingenuity, and the bonds between people. Humans survived because they protected one another, because they believed in the impossible, and because they refused to quit. The night passed peacefully, and when the twin suns rose the next morning, the settlement was alive with renewed energy. Humans moved forward with purpose, planning, building, and thriving. Ryan held the babies once more, smiling at their innocence and resilience. Humanity endured, not by chance but by choice. And as the sun rose high over the desert, its light reflecting on the hoverbikes and the thriving settlement, one truth shone clearly. Humans survived, not just for themselves, but for each other, for hope, and for every life that depended on them. Humans endured. Humans thrived. Humans carried hope, even across the longest nights.